Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Brittany Unfiltered. Hope you're having a really good Tuesday so far. I'm having a great Tuesday, as a matter of fact. I was just thinking this morning that I'm really glad I started this show on a Tuesday because Tuesdays have always kind of been a dud for me. I always call them second Mondays because I sort of feel like, you're tired from Monday, but you don't feel any closer to the end of the week than you did when you started. So it's not till Wednesday that you start feeling like you're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So Tuesdays were always kind of like a blah day for me. But now I actually am excited about them because I get to hang out with you guys, get to answer some of your questions, and get to talk about some of the news of the week, which is awesome. I did want to let y'all know, though, because I always get this question at least once every single episode, and it's usually from somebody who doesn't follow my stuff, or maybe this is the first time that you're seeing anything from me, and that is that yes, I am pregnant. About 6 months, as a matter of fact. I'm right at the edge of going into my third trimester, which is awesome. I kind of feel like I'm entering into the home stretch here, due in June, but at the same time, I'm getting kind of the beached whale effect, which is a fun new development. So anyway, I just wanted to clear that up in case you didn't know and wanted to ask. It's totally okay to ask, but that's why I kind of look like I'm smuggling a cantaloupe out of a grocery store. So anyway, just to clear that up for anybody who didn't know, I did want to touch really quick. I know it's been a few days, and I know that it's kind of exhausted itself in the news cycle, but I did want to touch really quick on the major news this week, and that's obviously the mosque shooting that happened at the end of last week. We all woke up to the news on Friday morning, and I wanted to talk about not only the incident itself, which I know we're all kind of familiar with the basic details at this point, but I wanted to talk about the aftermath of it and kind of what's been happening in the days afterward and sort of the residual fallout, because I think that there are some aspects that really haven't been talked about much and don't get a lot of play in the media, and I really wanted to bring some of these to your attention. So obviously, we all know that at this point, a gunman walked into two New Zealand mosques late last week and opened fire, ultimately killed 49 people and wounded a whole lot more. The victims were men, women, and children. It was absolutely horrible. He filmed it. It was terrible. I didn't actually watch the video. I don't know if you did. I'm not planning on doing that. The whole thing was so horrific. It's always horrific when this happens, okay? I think that anybody who follows my work, anybody who watches this show, anybody with a heart and a brain understands that this is terrible. It's always terrible when something like this happens. But I think one of the things that has started to add another layer of terrible to stories like this is the way that it is reported and the way that it's addressed in the media. And that is that it's no longer about simply reporting a story. It's no longer about this happened, this was a horrible tragedy, here are the names of the victims, let's all mourn together, here's how you can reach out and help. That's never what the media puts forward anymore. Instead, and we saw this again with the Parkland shooting, we saw it with the Pulse nightclub shooting, we've seen it over and over and over again, and the mosque shooting is just the most recent. Unfortunately, we now have this habit of reporting on a story and then using it as a political weapon. And this is something that you saw a whole lot over the last few days from the media and from the left, particularly progressives, who want to use this to push an agenda. Okay, so again, it's no longer this happened and how horrific is this. It's always this happened, here's how it makes Donald Trump bad. This happened, here's why the right is to blame. This happened, here's why gun owners are to blame. So it's spun up as a political narrative, and it's never just about reporting the story anymore. Somehow, and I'm not really sure how this happened, but somehow 6 million plus NRA members are now to blame for something that happened in New Zealand because a crazy man decided to go shoot up a mosque. Not really sure how NRA members are to blame for something that happened in another country, but apparently we are. Apparently conservatives are to blame. Apparently people who believe in strong immigration policies are to blame. Anybody, of course, who voted for Donald Trump is to blame. So I think that this is something that unfortunately I have to address because this has become the modus operandi, right? This has become the new way to report these stories. What I find interesting, though, is that this same group of people that likes to present these things as political weapons and likes to use them to gin up a particular viewpoint of those that they have political disagreements with, is that in order to do that, in order to spin this up into a weapon that can be used against people they don't like. What the left ultimately has to do is they have to ignore evil that happens on the other side that doesn't fit their political narrative. Because nobody wants to address the fact that evil is just evil, and that crazy evil people are responsible for their crazy evil decisions. Ultimately, that's where this should be left. If you're an evil person and you do evil, that's on you. That's not on anybody else. That's not on a president. That's not on a political persuasion. That's not on any religion. That's not, if you are evil, you're doing that completely and totally on you, right? And that's your fault. But in order to use it to blame someone, the media has to kind of cherry pick what they're going to talk about and what they aren't. You notice how the Mosque shooting immediately launched global calls of solidarity towards Muslims, and that, you know, it's painting Muslims as they are victims. They clearly were in this case. They were targeted, and it's so terribly sad, and we should come together because the Muslims are always getting demonized, and President Trump is always demonizing them, and conservatives are always demonizing them, and it's all about how they've gotten a bad rep, and that we clearly need to stand in solidarity with them. What I find interesting is that in order to push that narrative, here's what they have to ignore. The same group of people that has now found some, incredible amount of compassion for people who are persecuted on religious grounds doesn't talk about this. Did you know that in India, a majority Hindu nation, hate crimes against Christians have risen 57% in the first 2 months of this year? 57%. There's been an increase of government raids on churches. As a matter of fact, in one raid on one church, a female pastor was knocked unconscious by the cops. When they thought she was faking, they poured boiling tea in her mouth. When that didn't work, it was the middle of winter, and they dumped cold water on her. Happened in India just this past year. 2 men were killed for their faith in India. 2 Christian men were killed for their faith in India in February alone. In Nigeria, a lot of global groups are now warning that there is a full-scale religious genocide going on against Christians, particularly launched by Fulani Muslims who are burning villages that are predominantly Christian and killing people left, right, and sideways. Since February, 120 people have been killed and 140 homes have been burned in predominantly Christian areas in Nigeria. Again, since February alone, thousands were killed last year. This year looks like it's going to ultimately be no different. Again, these are attacks that are being waged by militant Muslims who absolutely hate Christians and want to drive them out of the country and kill them. According to Open Doors, which is a Christian advocacy group, 11 Christians are killed for their faith worldwide every single day. Of the top 10 nations that are the most dangerous for Christians, 7 of them are Muslim majority nations. The 8th one is actually about 50% Christian and about 50% Muslim. So you've got 8 out of 10 countries with either predominantly or split 50-50 Muslim communities here. Again, that's not to paint all Muslims as bad. I don't think that every single Muslim on the face of the planet wants to kill a bunch of Christians. I really, truly don't think that's true. I obviously, as a Christian, have extreme problems with their faith and with their theology. I do believe that there is a large segment of their theology that does call for violence. But I don't believe that every single Muslim is on a warpath against Christians. The same as I don't believe that every single white person is on a warpath against immigrants. That would be a crazy thing to say. At the same time, that is exactly what the left tries to do every single time you have an incident like this, is they take a crazy person who did a crazy thing and they use it to paint millions of other people as crazy or as racist or as phobic. But in order to do that, they have to ignore the fact that you have got large militant Muslim groups who are waging war against Christianity and against Christians all over the world. Christians to this day remain the most persecuted group for their religion in the world. But nobody ever talks about that. Nobody ever talks about what's going on in Nigeria. Nobody ever brings that up in the headlines because it doesn't fit a political narrative. Okay, so the danger, obviously, of using an event like this to try to portray millions of people or portray a president or portray people you don't like as being somehow complicit in this guy's actions is obviously problematic from the obvious, which is that nobody else is responsible for this guy's decisions but him. But it's also problematic because you do have to cherry pick what you're going to talk about and what you aren't. And you're going to ignore the fact that, look, evil exists in the world. It has existed in many forms. It is going to continue to exist. It has been done in the name of different religions, different political persuasions, different loyalties, patriotism, white supremacy, black power. Evil has always existed. And if you're going to confront it, you need to confront it at its core, which is the fact that it is evil. And it does not have a common denominator other than the fact that it is evil. Okay, so those are some stories that I definitely wanted to bring up for you guys. I know it's not the happiest topic, and I'm really sorry to have to start off with that, but it is the most obvious thing that happened this week. And just wanted to bring up the fact that, this is happening in other parts of the world. Christians are absolutely being persecuted. Jewish people are being persecuted. And if we're going to confront that, we have to confront it at all angles. So I'm going to take a really quick break, be back with you in just a couple of seconds. Hang in there with me. We're going to answer a question that I got on Twitter, which was really, really interesting. So hang with me, guys. Hey guys, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered. Thanks for sticking with me throughout the break. The second thing that I really wanted to talk to y'all about today was actually a question I got on Twitter, and it was an actual question. It wasn't like some gotcha question or something where somebody tried to pin me into a corner or anything like that. So it was something I really wanted to address because I thought it brought up a really good point, and it's one that we actually haven't talked about, and that is that I made the point on Twitter that if you have a 2-year-old who was diagnosed with cancer, your response to the doctor on that diagnosis would not be, well, that's okay, just go ahead and off him and we'll just make another one. You would never say that. You would never simply willingly sacrifice your child to the ravages of cancer and just say, well, I guess that's it then. You would fight for him, right? That's what we do as parents. So then my comment was, why should preborn babies who are diagnosed in utero with illnesses or with diseases be treated any differently than a child who is given a diagnosis that is obviously less than stellar? So somebody actually commented on it. And like I said, it wasn't a gotcha question. It wasn't somebody, trying to be nasty or anything. But they actually made the comment, I really struggle with this. Is it fair to knowingly bring a child into a life of constant suffering and not truly living an independent life? It's a life sentence for both the disabled child and parents, open to hearing other viewpoints, as it's a very difficult issue. And I thought that was a really good question, actually. And it's a topic that is worth discussing. And frankly, I think it's a good way to bring it up. Unfortunately, the problem with Twitter is that sometimes you get asked a question like this, and because of Twitter's 280 character limit, you can't always get into a long form response. So I wanted to respond to that here and talk a little bit about the sanctity of life and why I believe in the sanctity of life, and I am against abortion even in cases of fetal anomalies or disabilities. And this is a really sensitive topic. All right, this is a really touchy issue, and it's one that a lot of very ardent pro-abortion advocates like to toss in pro-lifers' faces as kind of it is used as a gotcha question. Not in the case of the person asking me this on Twitter, but in many cases it is used as a gotcha question because they like to throw out the most tragic circumstance they can think of, right? A lot of times you'll hear, what if an 11-year-old girl is raped by her dad and impregnated and the baby is diagnosed with microcephaly or something like that? They like to come up with the most tragic set of circumstances that they can because there's this theory that as a pro-lifer, if you can't answer the question in a way that kind of tidies up the whole situation with a nice, neat little bow and everything comes out roses and everybody's happy in the end, you don't have a viable solution and your answer is not satisfactory. So they throw it out there kind of as a way to sort of pigeonhole you into accepting these terrible scenarios, or at least that's what they try to do, right? So let me explain to you why I am anti-abortion even in cases like this. The first is that, and this is something that we have talked about in the past, doctors are not always correct. I know we really wish that they were, because it would make a lot of things a lot easier, but doctors are not always correct. They try to be, but it is a medical practice, not a medical perfection. All right, at least at this point. So for example, I actually know a young lady who's a good friend of mine who she had, in the last just couple of years, she gave birth to a little girl who was diagnosed in utero with skeletal dysplasia. And the doctors were telling her, you know, she's not going to be born right. She's going to come out all kinds of funky. Her quality of life is going to be absolutely terrible. It's probably better if you go ahead and abort now, because she's not going to have a good life if you give birth to her. That baby ended up being born 100% healthy. She was a little bit on the small side. She actually did develop a little bit small, but not in any way that was, you know, necessarily bad. She was just a small baby. So in cases like that, you have this young lady who is being told your child is going to have something wrong with her. It's probably better that you abort. The doctors ended up being 100% completely wrong. And that child is now a thriving 2-year-old and is doing wonderfully. So that's the first risk right there, is that you actually run the risk of aborting a child who would otherwise be perfectly healthy, simply because you buy into what the doctor says and you end up having the abortion because you think that it's a better option. So that's risk number one. The other thing that this really brings into focus is the question of who gets to determine whether another person's life is worth living, and where is that line? Okay, so when I talk about who gets to determine, the natural response that a lot of pro-abortion advocates would bring up is, well, the mother. That's a conversation between the mother and the doctor, right? That's the whole Ralph Northam line, is that's the conversation between the mother and the doctor. Unfortunately, that does create a very slippery slope, because as we saw recently, just over the past couple of years, in the UK, the government decided that they are the ones who actually have that power. In the case of Alfie Evans, as you might recall, you had parents who wanted to fight for their son, who said, look, there's experimental treatments that can be done, in this case on a toddler who had already been born. But they were saying there are things that we would like to try in other countries that might be able to help our son. And the government was the one that stepped in and said, no, we know better than you. Your son's quality of life is terrible. This isn't going to save him. We need to take the step of going ahead and taking him off of life support, because we have determined for you that his quality of life is not going to be good. So you run the risk of not only the parent making that decision, but the government getting involved when they disagree and actually taking over for that parent. So you end up with a really big problem there. The other issue is, like I said before, who determines, or how do we determine that somebody's quality of life is subpar? Okay, based on what standard? Based on our standard? Based on what? What physical anomaly is acceptable, and what physical anomaly crosses the line into, okay, that's no longer all right, somebody shouldn't have to live with that. For example, a lot of the cases of abortion for fetal anomalies are for things like Down syndrome, all right? So for things that, you know, people are born with them all the time, and they have a wonderful quality of life. And the parents that have them are just astounded by how amazing they are. These are people that live wonderful lives and are integral parts of their family, of our society. So what anomaly do we determine, okay, this is a bridge too far. People shouldn't have to live like this. Is it Down syndrome? Is it when a baby is born or could be born blind or deaf or missing a limb? Who gets to determine that, and where is the line there? So you end up in this gray area of now subjectively determining for another person who cannot decide for themselves whether or not their life is worth living and whether or not they can live with it. Okay, and so you're into this area of now playing God, and society is determining when somebody is perfect enough or healthy enough or mentally capable enough or physically capable enough of existing on the planet with all the rest of us. All right, so you end up with a huge, huge issue there. But let's drill down, because I know the response that I'm going to get to that. Let's drill down to, let's say that you take out some of those more fuzzy cases and you talk about fetal anomalies that are so intense and are so tragic that the doctor is saying this baby isn't going to survive this. It's not just that they're going to be born with some minor disability or a cleft palate or whatever. This baby is not going to survive this. They're going to live a few hours after birth. So, again, aside from the fact that doctors have been wrong, and it has been well documented that doctors have been wrong about diagnoses like that, and babies have been born perfectly healthy, or babies have been born with the diagnosis that they were given, but have defied the odds and actually gone on to live lives that astounded even medical professionals. Let's talk about the ones that are really tragic, because I think that is where things get a little bit touchier. And that is simply this, and I'm going to just break it down real simple, because I don't have the answer to every tragedy in the universe. No pro-lifer does, no pro-abortion advocate does either, by the way. So let's just talk about those. Being pro-life does not mean that we can wrap up every situation in a nice, neat little bow. It does not mean that we can reverse rape. It does not mean that we think we can cure every disease or solve every disability. That's not what being pro-life means. Pro-life does not mean that we can guarantee a perfect, beautiful quality of life for every single person. Being pro-life means that we believe in the sanctity of life and that life is worth fighting for. Not that it's guaranteed, but that it is worth fighting for. And that we accept that there are going to be times where we will lose that fight. And it will be tragic and it will be horrible. But it will not be because we predetermined for another innocent person whether they were worth fighting for or that their quality of life was going to be unlivable. That is what being pro-life means. It does not mean that every single person is guaranteed to make it. It means that every single person deserves the chance to. So when we talk about these really tragic cases, as hard as they are to talk about, it's not going to solve all of them. It's not going to mean babies are not born with disabilities, or that every baby is going to make it, or that parents are not going to walk a really tough road in that journey. It simply means that we believe that every single person is worth that fighting chance. Okay? So that's what this means. And that's where pro-abortion advocates end up losing this argument, is they want to go ahead and predetermine for that person. Pro-life advocates say, no, we don't get to do that. That person is worth fighting for simply because they exist in the first place. So that was the question that I got. That's the answer that I have for you. Hope that clears that up a little bit. If you want to talk about this further, we can in the future. I'm going to take another really quick break here and come back and wrap it up. But hope you guys stick with me. See you back in just a few minutes. Hey everybody, welcome back to Brittany Unfiltered. One really quick thing before we wrap up for today. I just wanted to remind you guys that first of all, if you have topics that you want to talk about now or in future episodes, make sure that you either message me or leave them in the comments here. I do read the comments, by the way, and I also read the hate mail. That's one of my favorite parts, so please bring it on. No, but if you have something that you want to talk about, then make sure that you let me know so that we can address it in future episodes, whether it is something that happened in the news and it's very specific, or it's a general topic, or you have questions, or you can actually tweet at me at @RealBritHughes. That's Brit with 2 T's, at @RealBritHughes. Follow me on Twitter. And I really love getting y'all's questions, and I really love feeling like this is kind of a more interactive experience rather than just coming at you guys with short snippet videos and not really responding to what y'all have to say. The other thing too, and I know that this is going to kind of sound really generic and really sort of obvious and cliched, but if you like this video, make sure that you share it and tell your friends about it, because Facebook is throttling, absolutely throttling our ability to reach people right now. Again, I'm one of those that I tend not to say things without proof. It does seem like it is very targeted. I can tell you that there are certain videos and certain things that I write that if the headline is about certain topics or has certain words in it, they seem to consistently not do as well as others. So I do think that there is some targeting of certain kinds of news, certain angles, certain messages, and certain viewpoints. So the only way to really kind of beat that is you guys, and to make sure that you guys are sharing with your friends, because that's one thing that they can't stop is, well, or that they at least haven't really tried to stop much, is your ability to share on your own page. So make sure that you do that. If you like what you're hearing, if you think that it's valuable, make sure that you let me know, and make sure that we kind of build this, because we're gonna have to build this organically. This isn't something that Facebook is going to do for us. This is not something that Twitter is going to do. These platforms have definitely made it an uphill climb, particularly for people on the right who have something to say. And I think that we have something to say, and I think it's important. So make sure that you do that. I appreciate it. Appreciate you being back with me every single Tuesday. We do try to get these up by 9 p.m. live on Facebook and YouTube. Sometimes due to technical difficulties, that doesn't always happen, but we are trying to do that very consistently. So I will see y'all back here next Tuesday at 9 p.m. Hope y'all have a great rest of your week. Thanks for watching Brittany Unfiltered.